anybody enjoy going to Walmart? Seriously, like some of you enjoy. Really, Mark? So I went to Walmart recently. I enjoy going to Walmart if I know exactly what I'm getting, where it's at, and I can get in and get out. Unfortunately, that happens very rarely. Usually I know exactly what I'm getting and I can get in. It's the getting out part that gets a little bit difficult. Well, I was in Walmart recently. And first of all, you can never find a cart that doesn't do something wrong, right? Right? So I had to get a few things. So I grabbed a cart and I started pushing them. Like, nope, that one is not working. So I grabbed another one. That one's even worse than the first one. And I went through 3 or 4 of these till I finally just went, you know what? I'm just going to deal with the one that I get this time. So I grabbed it. And they need to make those aisles curved so that the carts follow, right? Because it's a straight aisle and you're just constantly trying to get that cart back on, or you get the one that's got something on the wheel so it goes da-dunk, 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 right? You all understand because there's not a good cart in the batch, so everybody understands what it means to get a bad cart. Well, I'm doing my shopping, and it comes time for me to pay. I didn't have a lot of stuff, but I always start to get some anxiety when I start making my way to the registers because I know I have to choose a line. Okay. Now, I'm fully aware that they have this thing called self-checkout now. Okay. Now, I'm going to get a little bit of a soapbox. I'm fine with the self-checkout, but I also want people to keep their jobs, right? I struggle with that because, like, there's people that work there that need jobs, and if anyone can afford to pay people, it's the Walmart Corporation. So I struggle a little bit with going through self-checkout. I do it sometimes. But I do it when all the other lines are crazy full and I just go, never mind, I'm just going to self-checkout. Well, this day, the lines weren't crazy long, but there were 2 lines open. And I make my way over to the lines, and I have this dilemma. Which line will go faster, right? Now, there were several people in each line, so I started studying the lines. So there's a few things you have to look at, okay? So the first thing you look at is how many items do the people in front of you have, right? Okay, so I had my cart was about a quarter full. I was getting some things for chili, making some chili. So my cart was somewhat full, and so I start looking at the other carts, and I'm going, well, that guy's got 2 carts with him. That's going to take forever. Over here, there's a couple people with not so many. But see, I also learned that you have to see who's checking them out, right? You got to see how fast is this going, right? So in the midst of me trying to figure out, there's more people that keep getting in line. And I went, I've just got to make a decision. I've just got to make a choice. So I chose the younger person. I just did. I just felt like they were gonna do it a little bit faster because there was an older lady on this side, and I went, I feel like she's doing a lot of talking, right? She's talking to the people, and I don't mind talking, but I want to go. Like I need to get out of here. So I went to the young lady over here. And it's inevitable, right? You stand in line and you watch that line go fast, right? So I'm standing there, and she's kind of taking her time, and there's people that got in line behind me in the other line that start getting out, and I feel like they do this thing like, yeah, we were at the same thing. It's anxiety for me because I've got to make a choice, and I'm in line, and I'm getting frustrated. There's nowhere I had to be, but I was just frustrated. And so when you're frustrated in line at Walmart, you instead of saying stuff, your body language, you're like, if I can just make my body language communicate something, maybe they'll go faster, So I start to do the whole like this, right? And like for some reason, crossing my arms and looking at the other line, is going to make that person that's checking out in my line go faster. I don't know why I do these things. But the person behind me obviously recognized that I was frustrated. And this is a middle-aged woman. Not that that matters, because I guess I'm a middle-aged man now. She was a little bit older than me, but she goes, boy, this is frustrating, isn't it? And I said, yes, this is really frustrating. I always pick the wrong line. Every time I pick the wrong line, she said, yeah, I do too. But I just figure if I do, there's probably a reason for it. I'm like, oh, great. Won't tell her I'm a pastor then, because it's preaching to me. So we get up to the line, and right before me, there's this gentleman who is really mad. He is really mad. I mean, he is steaming, and I didn't hear what happened, what the interaction was. But by the time I get up there, this poor girl is in tears. And I said, are you okay? What's wrong? And she just said, it's just been a long day. So that guy was just really upset with me, and and so kind of put in perspective, and I did what I could to try to affirm her, and I'm getting my bags, getting my bags put in my cart and stuff, and the lady behind me walks around and gives this girl a hug. And then turns to look at me, and she says, I think we were supposed to be in this line, don't you? Yes. Yes. Yes, we probably were. Probably were. It's a good reminder. Maybe God puts us in places where we're supposed to be, whether we're comfortable or not. Well, concluding the Sermon on the Mount, and we're in the fourth and final Sunday of our series, Upside Down. And next week, Pastor Kyle's going to talk about this a little bit, about our Born the King series. He's going to talk about it here a little bit later, but we're going to start a new series. But we want to, before we head into Advent, we want to kind of tie up the bow here on the Upside Down series. In conclusion of this passage, this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus insists that a choice must be made. And the choice that he says must be made is essentially this: are you with me or are you not? Says Jesus. And in this series we've been in, we've seen that the words and actions of Jesus call us to live not according to the generally accepted practices around us, but according to the rule and reign of heaven, where God is already king. And in this way, when we do these things, if we do these things, we will help usher in God's kingdom here on earth. Our passage, our text for today is from Matthew chapter 7. Will you stand with me as we read from God's word? And we're just going to read verses 13 and 14. It's a short passage, but there's a lot in here. Starting in verse 13, Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So it's important that we understand a little bit of the context here. See, Jesus is summing up the Sermon on the Mount. He starts in chapter 5 back here with the Beatitudes, and he goes through the wise and foolish builders here later in chapter 7, but he begins his summary. And he begins his summary with this statement: enter through the narrow gate. And he goes on after this and he talks about these true and false prophets and how they'll be recognized by their fruit. And he talks about how to get to heaven. Then he talks about how to put his words into practice. how to stand amidst the storm. So you can understand he's done his Sermon on the Mount and he's going, okay, almost like, how do I finish this up? What are the big things that I need people to understand to leave with here? And these are questions that we should be concerning ourselves with too. Are we being recognized by our fruit? Are we recognizing others by the fruit? By the fruit meaning, is our life producing something worthwhile? Is it producing godly things? We should be concerning ourselves with how we get to heaven. We should be concerning ourselves with how to put Jesus' words into practice, not to just hear them, but to actually put them into practice. We should be concerning ourselves with how in the world do we stand amidst the storms of life. But instead of taking each issue, see, Jesus understands that in whole, it's our paradigm. It's the way that we see the world and how we value the kingdom of heaven that will ultimately determine the direction of our decisions. So I don't know, how many of you struggle with just simply making a decision? Anybody out there struggle with this? Okay, just making a decision can oftentimes be difficult. But those decisions often set us on a course, on a journey, and Jesus knew this. This is why he knew it was important for us to understand what it means to live by the kingdom, to live by the rule and the reign of God, and not by what he knew we would be tempted to live by, which is the least obstructed way. We would be tempted and will be tempted to go the direction and to go the way with the least obstacles, with the least obstructions. In this passage, we see that in determining our direction, we have the choice between a few things. I want to look at each one of these briefly and then try to understand exactly what was Jesus getting at. Because I'll be honest with you, even though I like to dig really deep into the passage and into each word, there's not much more here to go deeper into. Jesus just comes out and says it. And I spent time going, okay, there's got to be more here. There's got to be more here. There's not more here. So as much as I love bringing about new revelations and things that make people go, I never thought about that before. This isn't one of these sermons. This sermon is just right here. It's a reminder. Again, Jesus says, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So in this passage, we have two gates. There are two different gates. There's a wide gate and there's a small gate. And I can envision myself walking up to the lines at Walmart, right? And going, okay, where's the big gate? Where's the wide gate? Which one of these is going to get me on my path as fast as I can go and be on my way? Where's the path of least resistance? And I'm just going to go that way. But there's also a small gate. See, the small gate, it's small, so that means that only a few can get into it at a time. It means it's not easy to just kind of go, ooh, here we go. I got all this space. I'm good to go. There's a wide gate and a small gate. And I believe that for Jesus, this represents the choice that we have to make. Which journey are we going to set forth on? See, a journey always starts with one decision, I believe. You can be on a journey and you can often look back and go, I'm here right now in this place because of this one decision. Or I find myself in this situation because of that decision that I made back there. Now, for us that have difficulties making decisions sometimes, we have difficulties oftentimes because we're afraid of the consequences, right? We aren't sure what the future holds. Are we making the right decision? I love you to death, Lucy. She goes, oh, I know where you're going with this. My daughter can't make a decision. She can't do it. And she's making life-altering decisions like where to eat dinner, right? And then we get there, and then it's what do I have? You know, there could be a menu of 2 things, and she'll sit there and stare at both things. And I understand why, because she doesn't want to live with regret later on, right? She doesn't want to walk out of that place and go, I wish I would have gotten the other thing, right? We live that way. We struggle to make decisions because we're afraid of the path that it might put us onto. But Jesus also says there are 2 roads. There's a broad road and there's a narrow road. And these roads represent the journey that we're on based on the gate that we enter. So that first choice is important because that narrow gate sets us on the path of the narrow road. That wide gate sets us on the path of the broad road. You ever found yourself in a place where you actually did go, how did I get myself wrapped up in this mess? How did I get on this journey? There's a broad road and there's a narrow road. And then Jesus also mentions that there are 2 groups. There are the many and there are the few. And see, these groups represent how others tend to make decisions and how that affects our decision making. So we find ourselves on these roads and we can often go, as Jesus points out, there's many people that take that broad road. And they take it because they're like us. They're looking for the path of least resistance. And oftentimes the path of least resistance doesn't mean that there aren't things in our way. It just means that that's where everyone else is going, so they must be right. Right? We find ourselves there. And so Jesus says the many enter through it. See, there's a broad road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. Sometimes we don't know why we are where we are, why we're on the journey we're on. And the answer sometimes is just, that's what everyone else was doing, so it must have been the right way, right? You ever found yourself in a situation where you were a little bit lost? Okay, or maybe you're looking for a detour. So I was on my way out, leaving a KU basketball game recently. And as you know, if you've been to a KU basketball game, luckily I left a little bit early. But there was a bunch of cars that were taking this, what looked like a little bit of a detour. They were getting away from everyone who was going this way, who were at a standstill. So I went, they must know something that I don't know. So I'm going to follow them. Guess what? None of us knew anything. And we ended up on a road that was a dead end that everybody had to turn around. And so we're passing cars that I thought this must be the right way because there's a bunch of people going that way. But guess what? We were all following somebody who was just trying to take the path of least resistance. And we realized that we all were lost. And then he says there are 2 destinations. Small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, but only a few find it. Wide is the gate, broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. I wish when I set out on journeys I could see what the 2 possibilities were. Jesus says there are 2 possibilities. There's life or there's destruction. And he says many enter that humongous gate And they travel that huge road. Many do it. Everyone else is doing it. And then it looks like that must be the way that I should go. And he said, but that leads to destruction. But he says, but there are a few who choose the small gate, who choose that narrow road. And it leads to life. See, choosing life, though, takes discipline. And discipline is difficult. When we know we're choosing the road less traveled, we know we are entering into a journey that's going to be difficult. We just know that. And it requires discipline. And I believe that's partially what this passage is about. I believe that Jesus is saying that there is a right way. There is a way that leads to life, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. That's why very few people find it. That's why very few people are willing to just get on that road and go with it. Because it's going to be hard. But it requires discipline. A famous pastor, Craig Groeschel, who also does some leadership stuff, he says this. Listen to what he says about discipline. Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. Either way, there's going to be pain. Will you choose the pain of discipline or the pain of regret? Will you choose the pain of discipline or the pain of regret? See, just like each week in this series, this passage isn't really about necessarily the direction we go, but it's about whom or what we will follow. Just because the world says we should view life through a certain lens does not mean that we're viewing it through the lens of holiness, right? See, Jesus came and he said, the world, the way you see things, it's actually a little bit upside down. He even starts in chapter 5. When he starts his Sermon on the Mount, he immediately blows people away because he says, the way you've been seeing things, that's really not the way that God sees things. Let me tell you how God sees things. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. See, Jesus came and he said, I know you've got your ways of doing things, and the culture and the world around you has told you what's right and what's wrong and what's easy and what's difficult, but that's not the way of the kingdom. That's not the way of God. And in this series, we've been tackling these times where Jesus says, you've heard it said this, but I say it's actually supposed to be this way. And all through this passage, this Sermon on the Mount, he talks about murder, and he talks about adultery, and he talks about divorce and oaths and eye for an eye. And he talks about ways, how we're supposed to give, how we're supposed to pray, how we're supposed to fast. And they were all things that the society began to say, okay, we'll accept that. We'll accept that that's the way that it is. And Jesus comes in and he goes, that's the way that it's been accepted. But Jesus says, that's not the way of my Father. That's not the way of God. Teenagers, can I talk to you for a moment? One of you said, sure. Teenagers, we love you. We love you to death. You are Lawrence First Church. You are our family. And I don't, on Wednesday nights, if you have a child, a teenager, if you know someone who has a teenager, you need to have your teenagers be a part of the youth ministry that's happening here. There's some fantastic things happening here in the youth ministry. They've been having between 35 and 45 teenagers on Wednesday evenings. And they're not getting together just to play. They're playing. They're having fun. They're having a good time. But they're getting stuff done back there. Teenagers, you will live the rest of your life with people telling you that certain things are acceptable, that certain things are just the way they are, that to do it opposite is just way too hard. And would God really do that? Would God really do that? God really wouldn't ask you to do that if it was this hard, would he? Yes, he would. He absolutely would. There is a certain way that God calls us to live. A certain way God calls us to live, and teenagers, it will not be the popular way. It will not be the way that most of your quote-unquote friends do it or say that it's supposed to be done. But I promise you, to live God's way and to behave God's way will lead to life. It will lead to life. I promise you. His word says it. And you can rely on all the stories that all of us old people have where we've made mistakes and we'll come to you and say, yes, I thought that was a good way. It wasn't. It was the big gate. It was the broad road. And it was the road that many people took. And it was easy because everyone else was taking that road. Man, I'm going to need something there. Ouch. Never injured myself preaching before. And guess where it leads? It leads to destruction. Jesus says it leads to destruction, and it does lead to destruction. Here's the great thing, though. And here's the great news that we all need to know. We don't have to be stuck on that broad road. We don't have to be stuck with that decision. We have to live with the decision. But through God's grace and love and mercy, God says, you know what, you can come through the narrow gate anytime. You're welcome on this narrow road anytime you want. All you got to do is say, I'm done with that way of life. This is what repentance is. I'm done with this way of life. I've tried that broad road. You know what the broad road does? It just keeps going and going and going and going and going. And after a while, you start to go, is there really any fulfillment here on the broad road other than I get to do it with other people who are also walking toward destruction? And God goes, exactly. Come over here. Come get on the narrow road. This narrow road leads to life. This is what Jesus meant when he said, I've come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Jesus doesn't call us just to be alive. He calls us to truly live. Matthew 6:33. I finished with this last week. But Matthew 6:33 says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. See, Jesus knew that it would be difficult for us to keep straight all the things that we were supposed to do correctly and to focus on. And Jesus sums it up there and he says, but if you'll just seek my ways first, if you'll just seek my kingdom first, all these things will take care of themselves. All the things that you want and desire, they're going to take care of themselves if you'll just seek my ways first. So in response, question. When we seek his kingdom first, we are seeking life. Will you choose life today? Will you choose life today? God's ways, the path that Jesus came to lay out for us, it's the way to go. And I'm not going to, a lot of people like to say, well, it's the better way. It's not just the better way, it's the only way. It's the only way that leads to life, is life in Christ. And all you have to do, like I said, is just, I'm tired of this way. I'm done with this way. I want to get on the narrow road. No, not everybody's going down that road like they are the wide road. But I want to get on the narrow road. God says, all you got to do is trust me. You just got to put your faith in my son, Jesus. And Jesus says, just trust me. Follow me. That's all he said to those fishermen. Come follow me. And they left everything they had. And they followed him. And Jesus just says, you can follow me too. Just put that other stuff to the side. Put your faith and trust and hope in me. We bow.